Hey, it's Harris again with another video. This one is on hyperawareness OCD and its relationship to depersonalization disorder, how they relate and what you can kind of do to overcome this issue. So hyperawareness OCD is where you become mindful of what's going on in your own body or in your surroundings, and then the awareness of the awareness disturbs you. That kind of sounds confusing, but basically you're being mindful, and then the fact that you're being mindful actually becomes disturbing to you. So, some therapists have called this mindfulness hijacked. Your own very process of being aware of the present disturbs you, and then you usually try to distract yourself. And this usually manifests itself in sensorimotor OCD, which is being hyper aware of your breathing, hyper aware of swallowing, blinking, other involuntary bodily functions. Certain noises or sounds could bother you. And one of the thoughts that occurs is that, I'm going to be aware of this. And the fact that I'm going to be consciously aware of this is going to ruin the quality of my mental life, because I'll always be thinking about it. So you're worried. You develop certain thought distortions around this. Now, what's interesting about this and why it relates to depersonalization is that in depersonalization, people become very hyper aware of existence. Now, depersonalization involves a lot of thought distortions. It involves a lot of deluded thinking, a lot of catastrophic fears that are total bullshit. But one thing that is valid is that people in depersonalization do become aware of the automaticity of human existence. A lot of our thoughts, our gestures, our bodily functions are automatic. We're not in control of them. And people in depersonalization oftentimes become aware of that. And that mindful awareness doesn't produce in them a feeling of calm. It actually produces in them a feeling of fear of existence. And this kind of gets into the existence phobia, this hyper-awareness, which a lot of times in the mindfulness literature, they'll say, you'll be mindfully aware, and then that will make you calm. But for people in depersonalization, they just freak out because they're like, I'm aware, and now that disturbs me. The fact that I'm aware isn't soothing, it disturbs me. So, the remedy for this, I talk a lot about things in the past. If you do a lot with the psychodynamic issues of childhood, this will help take away a lot of these anxieties. And depersonalization is very psychosomatic. It's a mind-body disorder. The trauma is in your mind, but the trauma is also stored in your body. So a lot of these weird body feelings we have come from trauma. They're artifacts of trauma, and they're literally stored in the body. But I'll be taking a look at the mindfulness approach. We're not going to be talking about past issues in this video. And really, mindfulness is actually the way to get over this. Because what people do is they try to distract themselves. They'll go, no, I'm aware of my breathing. And what people also often do is they try to interfere with involuntary bodily processes, such as breathing, blinking, swallowing. They become so aware, they try to control them. They have very difficult time of just allowing themselves to be mindful of them non-judgmentally and tolerating the discomfort. And they develop the catastrophic fear that I'm always going to be thinking about this, it will never go away. And then they try to distract themselves. So people with depersonalization have this because we become aware of the automatic nature of existence, and people with depersonalization are very OCD prone. Okay, so hyperawareness OCD falls under kind of the blanket of primarily obsessive OCD or purely obsessive OCD, puro. We're not talking about outward compulsions. We're talking about mental rituals. So I'm going to read a little bit from a book called the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD. It's a really good book. It came out last year. If you're suffering from OCD, especially primarily obsessive OCD, it's a really good book. So this is a chapter on hyperawareness. The underlying theme behind hyperawareness obsessions is, I am consciously aware of something benign that no one overtly thinks about, and I want to stop being aware of it, but I can't. One way in which you may be looking at the nature of these obsessions is is almost as too much mindfulness. In other words, it's an obsession with mindfulness, with attention to the present moment. However, it's the resistance to this awareness that actually pulls you away from the experience of the present moment, and it's thus not mindfulness gone wild, it's just OCD attacking from another angle. Mindful acceptance must include acceptance of any discomfort that comes with awareness of the present moment. So, kind of the remedy to this is actually to practice mindfulness. Let's say you got breathing OCD. This is something I suffer with. It's you're aware of your breathing, and this disturbs you. Well, instead of trying to get your mind off it, become mindfully aware of it, and be accepting of the thought that this disturbs you. You truly have to be non-judgmental. That's what mindfulness is. It's not putting a judgment on the experience. It's being non-judgmental. And this is very hard if you find being hyper-aware disturbing. If you find mindfulness disturbing, but you have to constantly practice non-judgmentality towards your experience. That's the core of mindfulness. Mindful acceptance must include acceptance of any discomfort that comes with awareness of the present moment. Instead of pulling away from the experience of awareness, mindfulness asks you to stay with it, whatever thoughts, feelings, or sensations may tag along. And this goes along with tolerance for discomfort. Okay? And one thing you can do if you've got particularly bodily obsessions, sensorimotor OCD they call it, is interoceptive cue exposure. Where you literally, the things that make you uncomfortable in your body, you can expose yourself to them. And that will help you because that's exposure, and you will habituate to it. So somatic obsessions, sometimes called sensorimotor or somatoform obsessions, deal with the intrusive sense of awareness of involuntary bodily processes, typically involving but not limited to awareness of breathing, awareness of blinking, awareness of swallowing, awareness of body positioning. For example, where your arms are in relation to the rest of your body, awareness of physical sensations that are benign or of unknown origin, for example, itching, warmth, heartbeat, and so on, awareness of ringing in the ears, awareness of eye floaters. Some additional common triggers in the category of hyperawareness include concern with awareness of benign sounds, such as birds, chimes, traffic noises, awareness of remembering songs, getting songs stuck in your head, sometimes called earworms, awareness of memories of specific images, sometimes benign, sometimes disturbing, but in either case involving a sense of being stuck with them. Awareness of your own thinking processes, that you have a mind, that thinking is happening at a level that feels burdensome. I think people with depersonalization can just totally, if they don't have this outright, they can kind of empathize with a lot of these things. Just overthinking to a ridiculous extent. So, okay, primary obsessions associated with hyperawareness. So here are some of the thoughts, the catastrophic thinking, the fears that keep it going. One of them is, I will never go back to doing these things involuntarily. I will therefore do them in a stilted or strange way. This is one of the fears. My awareness of this thing will become so burdensome that I won't be able to function and will become depressed or go insane. You're catastrophizing. So, the primary compulsions associated with hyperawareness typically involve mental checking for the trigger, breathing, swallowing, and so on, mental review of the voluntary or involuntary nature of the trigger, and this, of course, is very similar to checking in that you see in depersonalization. People constantly obsessing over how they feel and the nature and the qualitative nature of their sensory experience. Constantly introspecting and focusing inward, and this is very involved in hyperawareness. Mental review of the significance of the awareness, reassurance seeking, particularly from treatment providers to confirm that this is not the sign of severe mental illness and that it will go away in a specific amount of time. Avoidance of situations that might trigger the obsession. So avoidance, of course. So, what should you really do? Basically, the main tool for getting over this is mindfulness. Okay? You have to practice mindfulness. So they have a little exercise here. What thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, or other internal data do you believe you will need to mindfully accept as you alleviate your hyperawareness OCD? Okay. What thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, or other internal data do you believe you will need to mindfully accept as you alleviate your hyperawareness OCD? And this oftentimes goes along with health anxiety. If you're very somatically obsessed in particular, you're very worried a lot of times about the nature of how you feel, and if that could mean that you have a medical problem. So this is also very related with hypochondriasis, which a lot of people say is on the OCD spectrum. You just can't get the idea that you have a health problem out of your head. So the next section is meditation tips for hyperawareness OCD. Meditation in the moment and in specific meditative practice may play a significant role in treating your hyperawareness obsession, even if you have an obsession with awareness of your breathing. In any form of meditation, you are working on strengthening the mental muscle that allows you to disengage from thinking and return to the present experience of the breath, or the stairs, the food, or whatever present thing is your anchor in the meditation session. So we're talking about mundane meditation where you're focusing on the present moment. Okay? And you have to do this non-judgmentally. And this is such a hard thing to do. I mean, even for me, it's hard to do. But you have to attend to the experience you're having, focus on it more, amplify it. If you have hyperawareness OCD of your breathing, the remedy isn't to distract yourself. It's actually to become more aware, to habituate yourself to the hyperawareness, to address that thought distortion of the catastrophic thinking of, oh God, I'm never going to go back to being the same because I'm always going to be obsessed. You just get rid of the value judgments that you're placing on the experience and get back to being mindfully aware of the experience itself. No judgment, true mindfulness. And this is very hard if you have hyperawareness OCD, admittedly. Acknowledge that your mind has taken the act of meditation and shifted it to a performance review. Practice willingness to have that experience and bring yourself back to the breath, even if that seems like playing into the OCD. So they have a little script. I'm thinking about my breathing. I can accept that this thinking is happening and disengage from being an active participant in it. Even now, I am participating by identifying it, but it's okay for me to be imperfect in this moment. Let me just take my time and let go of any problem solving I'm able to let go of in this moment. What if the thinking never stops? That's another thought. I can have that thought, not mind having it for now, and return to the breath. So it's like when people that have hyperawareness try to practice mindfulness, there are intrusive thoughts, which is the key of primarily obsessive OCD. Obsessive thoughts you don't want, pop into your head, that try to hijack the mindfulness process. And you have to go and just accept those thoughts, accept that that's part of the experience, and then get back to being mindfully aware of the experience itself. This is all kind of confusing, and a lot of therapists don't get this shit. I mean, we're talking about something that many therapists don't get. Pure OCD, we're talking about, harm OCD, relationship OCD, just right OCD, sensorimotor OCD. This is stuff that a lot of therapists do not know. They get it wrong. This stuff gets misdiagnosed all the time. What I'm talking about here is a little bit of kind of a complex thing, but if you can get what I just described to you, that will help you be mindful in depersonalization. It will really help you practice mindfulness without it getting hijacked. Okay. So, I mean, this chapter goes on to talking about in vivo ERP, or exposure and response prevention. So it's important to expose yourself. And really, you do this through mindfulness. So in vivo ERP for hyperawareness means eliminating avoidance of triggers, and instead going out of your way to purposefully think the thoughts instead of flee from them. As in other forms of OCD, there are several strategies, particularly avoidance and mental review, that involve compulsively resisting your awareness of an unwanted thought. You may have come to believe that the unwanted thought is inescapable because something like breathing, blinking, or thinking is essentially normal, whereas you may see thoughts of violence or fear of contamination as being somehow different. But the obsession here is not with the blinking, swallowing, breathing, and so on. It's with the fear that your awareness of it will keep you from experiencing joy or will make you descend into madness. Okay, the obsession is not about the physical activity itself, it's with the fear of the awareness. It's with the fear that your awareness will keep you from experiencing joy or will make you descend into madness. So in essence, it's a fear of mind contamination. Okay, hyperawareness is a fear of mind contamination. As such, anything you do to cleanse your mind of this fear should be viewed as a compulsion. The idea to cleanse your mind of the mind contamination, which is the awareness itself. You think, oh God, I'm being aware of it. I shouldn't be aware. That's a compulsion to push out and cleanse your mind of the hyperawareness itself. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So exposure therapy means purposefully putting yourself in situations where you may be especially hyperaware and then resisting the mental review or avoidant impulses that follow. So don't avoid, expose, which means becoming aware and being mindfully non-judgmental of all the feelings you have and the intrusive thoughts that pop up. For hyperawareness of thinking, try to engage in social interactions that may require some additional mental processing, such as ordering food from a menu. As you look at the menu, tell yourself that you have no idea what you will order and try to hold on to the idea that there's too much information in front of you. Wait for the server to arrive and then randomly pick an item at the last minute, risking being completely wrong. Okay, for hyperawareness of breathing, purposefully meditate on your breath. When you begin to notice that you are noticing your breathing more than you would like, tell yourself that this is absolutely terrible and will result in insanity. So this stuff might strike people as weird. This is actually to try to amplify the fear, which to a lot of people is pretty strange. In exposure, especially of these thoughts, you're trying to expose yourself to the fearful thought to show you that the thought itself isn't something to be feared. And I know this stuff, when you first hear this stuff, this is really freaking confusing. The purpose of this exposure form of meditation is to generate and habituate to the anxiety that comes with your fear. For hyperawareness of swallowing or blinking, you may practice swallowing while telling yourself you are doing it wrong. Doing this in public may heighten the anxiety. Okay, and there's just all these things you can do to expose yourself to the awareness, and this really goes along with, as I was saying before, the existence phobia people have. In depersonalization, something might trigger your DP to get worse. It's just thinking about the nature of existence, and you should actually go read about the nature of existence. I mean, it's definitely an exposure strategy that can work. Once again, all these strategies are part of the puzzle piece of getting over DP. I talk about a whole spectrum of ways to deal with depersonalization. Okay, and actually in this chapter, the bulk of the remedy for this is just to be mindful. It's just to actually be more aware. And they kind of say in here that trying to use cognitive strategies can itself become kind of an impediment to improving with hyperawareness. It's really being mindful of your experience, being grounded in your body. And like I said before, depersonalization is very psychosomatic, so you feel very strange in your body because you have a lot of trauma, and a lot of trauma is stored in the body. Okay, so I hope this video helps. This is just kind of a topic. Some people have asked about hyperawareness and its relationship to depersonalization. So, in this case, distraction is not always the best. It's not always the best tool. But do keep in mind that this is a form of anxiety. Pure is a form of anxiety. So if you reduce your stress levels, practice relaxation every day, that will help reduce OCD as well. And of course, I talk about all the stuff from the past. But in this video, just want to address hyperawareness. So that's the video for today. Hope that helps clear up some issues that are a little confusing. And take care.